Do you hear this rumble? It is not thunder, not an earthquake. It is thousands of synchronized strikes of iron against wood. A rumble which, according to the historian Polybius, was more terrifying than the battle itself, the march of the Roman legion. Each step echoed in the chest like the blows of a hammer. Each sound was a promise that before you stood an army that could not be broken by a simple assault. But what gave these men the confidence to stand to the very end? What secret allowed them to survive in battles where other peoples perished by the tens of thousands? The answer lies in the very formation that would later be called the Tortoise. This combat formation was called testudo in Latin. The legionaries locked their shields so that they formed a single shell. In front, a wall. Above, a roof. On the sides, barriers. As if it were a huge living organism, where each man was a scale of armor. In the ancient descriptions of Tacitus, we read that arrows and stones literally bounced off this construction, like rain from a rocky roof. Picture the scene. Dozens of ranks of soldiers, bent under the weight of the equipment, holding in front of them wooden shields with iron rims. Each shield weighed more than 10 kilograms. The burden of the sun fell on their shoulders, sweat poured into their eyes, the breath of their comrades could be felt nearby. And still, no one dared to falter. If just one man dropped out, a deadly gap appeared in the shell. That is why the testudo demanded not only strength, but also absolute trust in each other. A Roman centurion, the commander of about 80 men, had the right to beat a soldier with a stick if he shifted even slightly out of formation. Discipline was harder than iron, and it was discipline that turned a crowd of men into a wall. Unlike barbarian warriors, who often fought each for himself, the legionary existed only within his line. And this dependence made their resilience truly inhuman. Archaeological finds in Britain confirm the effectiveness of the testudo. In excavations near the ancient fortifications of Roman camps, arrows were found stuck in the ground at an angle, as if they had slipped off from above. Scholars believe these were the traces of volleys against Romans protected by the tortoise. Even time itself left the imprint of the invincible shell. Consider this. Thousands of years ago, people without modern materials or technology created the perfect shield of collective survival. It was not just a military technique. It was a symbol that a united formation is stronger than any individual bravery. But how were these soldiers prepared to endure not only the enemy's assault, but also their own fear? And what did the training look like for that very moment when the tortoise had to come alive on the battlefield? In the silence of the camp came the sound of grinding whetstones and hammers striking bronze. The preparation of the Roman legion for a campaign was no less harsh than battle itself. Each legionary carried not only his weapons, but a part of the army with him. Polybius wrote that a soldier was obliged to drag up to 30 kilograms of equipment, armor, helmet, javelins, food for several days, and even tools for fortifying the camp. That is why they were nicknamed Marius Mules, in memory of the reform of Consul Gaius Marius, who laid the burden of supply upon the shoulders of the soldiers themselves. The main weapon of the legionary was the short stabbing sword, the gladius, but it was the shield, the massive rectangular scutum, that was the true center of all tactics. The scutum was made from several layers of wood, glued together and covered with leather, with a metal boss in the middle. It weighed about 10 kilograms, and from these shields the impenetrable Tortoise was born. The shield was not just protection, but also a symbol of duty. Losing the scutum was considered a disgrace, for which a soldier could be expelled from the army. To prepare for the testudo, legionaries were trained not so much to fight as to endure. Caesar, in his commentaries on the Gallic War, noted that training consisted of endless marches, rehearsing signals, and drilling formations. The blows of staffs and the shouts of centurions forced the body to conform to the rhythm of the legion. The tortoise itself was an exercise in trust. You covered the comrade to your left, and your comrade above covered you. If one man weakened, everyone would die. Imagine a field where, under the scorching sun, Romans march for dozens of kilometers in full gear. The back bends under the load, feet are rubbed raw and bleeding, lips cracked from thirst. But instead of rest, the centurion orders them into testudo, and the soldiers once again lift their shields, Once again listen to the sound of the trumpet that sets the rhythm of their movement. Every blast of the trumpet was a command. Make a mistake and your comrade would lose his protection. This is how the Romans turned hardship into habit. Even food on the march was part of preparation for the ordeal. The legionaries' ration consisted of simple bread, porridge made from wheat, and small portions of meat or cheese. All this had to be prepared by the soldiers themselves, often in haste amid dirt and smoke. Hungry, tired, with a heavy load on his back, he still had to be ready to lock the formation. A special role was played by the mid-level officers, the centurions. They were not just overseers, but models of endurance. The centurion always marched in the front line, beside the standard, and it was his shout that forced the legionaries to keep their shields raised until their arms went numb. According to historians, it was these men who turned scattered recruits into a war machine. Archaeological excavations of camps reveal traces of training. Wooden stakes have been found into which legionaries drove their swords, practicing strikes at the enemy's body. Spears discovered at bivouacs bore marks of hundreds of throws. All this proves that their training was not symbolic, but a daily torment of body and spirit. But why was it that a studo that became the symbol of this army? After all, there were other formations: wedge, line, square. The reason is that the tortoise best displayed the very essence of Rome. It demanded not rage or frenzy, but composure and self-sacrifice. It turned an individual warrior into part of a wall that could only move forward. And then, in one moment, the preparation was over. The crash of a trumpet split the morning silence, the standards were lifted, and the column of legionaries set out on the march. At that moment, fear retreated, because the formation came alive. But what did the first minutes of real battle look like when the enemy's assault collided with this iron discipline? When the morning mist rose over the field, the first sound of the trumpet was heard. It did not resemble music, it was a metallic roar that pierced the air and made the heart beat faster. The column of legionaries unfolded into battle order. The historian Livy wrote that even before the enemies closed in, the Romans turned the chaos of the march into precise lines. There was no running, no panic. Everyone knew his place. Every step had been rehearsed in advance. The first trial was the barrage. Gauls, Germans or Parthians would unleash clouds of arrows and javelins, hoping to break the formation before the hand-to-hand combat began. It was here that the tortoise came alive. A trumpet call, and the soldiers raised their shields, locking them into a single shell. The men in front covered their comrades ahead, those on the sides protected the flanks, while the ones in the middle raised their shields overhead, turning the formation into a living fortress. This formation, the testudo, bore the full weight of the opening moments. Tacitus noted that stones and arrows, falling from above, slid across the roof of shields and shattered on the ground without causing serious harm. The enemies saw before them not men, but a moving hill that did not stop beneath their onslaught. It was the image of Rome, which did not yield under pressure. Imagine the moment. The sky is closed off by a black rain of arrows. Their hissing merges into a single endless whistle. But below, silence. The legionaries stand still. Only the scraping of shields and heavy breathing can be heard. The shield above your head becomes your sky, the comrade to your left your wall, and the sound of the trumpet your heartbeat. You know, if you falter, if you lower your shield for even a second, death will enter through that gap. Here the scutum became a symbol of life. Its weight, which yesterday seemed torment during training, now saved men from arrows and stones. The strike of iron above resonated with a dull thud, but the shell held. The soldiers felt the wood tremble under their hands. The iron boss spark as it was struck, yet the formation remained intact. The centurion marched in the front ranks, ensuring no one left their place. His voice, harsh and commanding, rose above the noise of battle. Ancient sources emphasize that it was the centurions who were the first to take the blows, in order to hold the line by their own example. Their severity in training became a shield when real battle began. Archaeological finds confirm the reality of these moments. At battle sites, broken arrowheads have been unearthed, stuck in the soil layers as if they had fallen from above without piercing their target. This suggests that the arrows never reached their mark due to collective defense. The shell of the tortoise truly worked. But the barrage was only the beginning. Enemies who failed to break the formation with arrows moved into melee. The Gauls charged with massive swords. The Germans roared and threw themselves forward. The Parthians attacked again with cavalry strikes. In this moment, the Tortoise unfolded, transforming into a battle line. And then the true carnage began. The legionaries hurled forward their pila, heavy throwing spears. Each pilum weighed up to 2 kilograms and had an iron tip that bent on impact. According to Caesar, these spears pierced enemy shields, rendering them useless. The enemy lost protection, and the Roman was already raising his gladius for the killing thrust. Thus, the first minutes of battle turned into a hellish test of endurance. The Tortoise saved the legionaries from ranged fire, but ahead of them lay the clash where the fate of each man would be decided. The sun rose higher, the sound of battle spread across the valley, and yet the worst was still to come, when a mass of enemies, outnumbering them several times over, hurled itself against the Roman walls. The battlefield boiled like a seething cauldron. The clash of metal thundered all around. The air reeked of smoke and blood, and the ground beneath their feet turned sleek. This was the true climax of the fight. The enemy, crazed by rage and their own losses, hurled themselves at the Roman formation with a single purpose: to break the wall of shields. Polybius wrote that in these moments, the din of battle became a roar like the ocean, and it was in this chaos that Roman discipline proved decisive. The formation was directed by officers. On the flanks stood the tribunes, military tribunes who oversaw order and relayed signals. In the front ranks were the centurions, who by their own example held the soldiers in place, and above all rose the voice of the legate, the general appointed by the Senate or the emperor. He set the strategy, but its success depended on the precise execution of every small part. At the height of battle, the Roman Tortoise resembled a stone fortress against which waves broke. The Germans crashed into it with all their weight, swinging massive swords and axes, but the strikes only glanced off the scute. The men inside the formation felt every shock, as though they were holding up a house roof in a storm, and yet the shell did not break. The testudo absorbed the assault, while the legionaries knew the longer they endured, the sooner the enemy would tire. Here unfolded the tactic of small steps. The legionaries did not throw themselves forward, did not attempt feats of heroism. They moved as one body, advancing step by step. Every shove of the shield, every thrust of the gladius was part of a single machine. To a modern observer, it could be compared to a line of football players forming a defense, but under a hail of blows and with the risk of dying in an instant. Archaeological evidence confirms the scale of these battles. In the Teutoburg forest, where the Romans suffered catastrophe, vast numbers of broken weapons and pieces of armor have been found. Scholars note that the concentration of remains indicates combat in conditions of close encirclement. Even in defeat, Roman legionaries held their ranks until the end, dying within their formations. This shows how deeply ingrained the habit of fighting side by side was in them. Battles lasted for hours. Under scorching sun or cold rain, men stood like living walls. Their arms went numb from the weight of shields, their muscles cramped, but discipline did not allow them to lower their weapons. Sources mention that a legionary had to endure the onslaught until the enemy retreated, or until the trumpet gave the next signal. The human body tore itself apart, but Roman will forced it to go on. A special role was played by the standard bearers. The eagle of the legion, the Aquila, was a symbol of honor. Losing the standard was considered the greatest disgrace. That is why even when the formation wavered, soldiers clung to the standard as to a point of support. It was not just a symbol, it was the center of the entire psychology of battle. And yet, not every battle ended in victory. There were moments when the enemy found a weak point, when the Tortoise broke. Then, chaos swept through the ranks, and thousands of lives were lost within minutes. But even in defeats, Roman tactics left their mark. The barbarians, having seen the power of the Tortoise, later tried to imitate its elements, but never achieved the same degree of cohesion. The climax of battle was the moment when the fate not only of an army, but of the empire itself was decided. For every legion was a part of Rome's vast machine. By holding their formation today, they opened the road to conquest tomorrow. And it was precisely this link between personal sacrifice and the destiny of the state that turned every tortoise into a symbol. But what happened afterward, when the roar of battle subsided and the field lay covered with bodies? When the last sound of the trumpet faded and the clouds of dust settled, the battlefield became a terrifying sight. The ground was churned with pits from hoofs, and pressed down by the weight of thousands of feet. The air reeked of metal and smoke, and the silence felt louder than any cry. It was at this moment that the battle reached its resolution. The outcome was determined not only by the endurance of the Tortoise, but by the Romans' ability to keep their order after the blood-drenched onslaught. Livy remarked that a legion which withstood the assault and preserved its formation almost always claimed victory. Opponents, drained by their attempts to pierce the shell, gradually gave way. Then the Romans advanced in counterattack. The formation opened, and the soldiers pressed forward step by step, finishing off the enemy. Their gladi rose and fell, every strike short and precise. The Romans did not swing their weapons wildly for effect. They killed with economy, spending their strength so it could last against dozens of foes. The key moment of resolution came with the legate's command. He decided whether to continue pursuit or to halt. Excessive pursuit could end in ambush. That is why the Roman army strove to keep its composure. Even in victory, discipline remained more important than emotion. Archaeological research confirms the scale of losses. In the Teutoburg forest, where the Romans suffered defeat at the start of the 1st century AD, countless bones have been found lying in layers. This points to the mass death of soldiers who held their ranks to the very end. At the same time, in places of victory, such as Alesia, remains of siege works and straight lines of camps have been discovered, showing that even after combat, the Romans maintained order and fortified. The resolution of battle was not only a military outcome, but also a psychological test. Soldiers who had endured hours of blows and shouting now stood among the dead. Their faces were covered in blood, their own and others. Their hands shook with fatigue. Yet the centurion still held the staff in his hand, and his command once again gathered the formation. The empire did not allow its warriors to relax. Here too the role of symbols reappeared. The legion's eagle, the Aquila, rose above the battlefield as a sign of survival. The loss of the eagle was seen as a tragedy for all of Rome. Enemy tribes preserved captured standards as the highest trophies, while the Romans waged campaigns for decades to reclaim them. This symbolic element turned every victory and every defeat into part of the empire's greater history. Tacitus wrote that after battle, the soldiers gathered the enemy's weapons and stacked them into heaps to display the scale of victory. These trophies would be sent to Rome, where the people greeted the victors with triumphs. But to the legionaries themselves, triumph meant something else: the chance to return alive from the formation and to lift the scutum once more the next day. Resolution also brought material consequences. Victory meant new lands, slaves, tribute. Defeat meant the loss of thousands of lives and the endangerment of the frontier. Roman history knew both outcomes, but even the gravest defeats did not destroy the most important thing: the ideal of discipline embodied in the Tortoise. It is estimated that an average legion during the height of the empire numbered about 5,000 soldiers. The loss of even a third of such a force was considered a catastrophe, for every unit of the legion was an expensive machine, forged from iron, blood, and training. Modern historians, such as Goldsworthy, note, it was precisely the ability to remain effective after the fiercest battles that made Rome unique. But behind this resilience always stood a human question. What was it like to be part of a wall that had no right to falter? What did the legionary feel when, after the battle, he removed his helmet and saw that only half of his comrades still stood beside him? And what drove these men to rise again the next day and once more turn themselves into a living fortress of the empire? When it was all over and the army returned to camp, the most dreadful stage began. Not the battle itself, but the silence after it. Sources tell us that soldiers sat by the fires, ate cold bread, and stared into the darkness. Some silently bandaged their wounds, others cleaned blood crusted on their swords. And in that silence, each man understood, survival came not from personal strength, but because the formation had held. The Tortoise saved them, where the individual would have been insignificant before the enemy's onslaught. Caesar, in his commentaries on the Gallic War, emphasized that it was discipline, not fury, that brought victory. The soldier who charged alone at the enemy was the first to die. But he who remained in his formation could live another day. This principle made the Roman army unique. It did not rely on the heroism of individuals, it transformed thousands into one body. The testudo became the symbol of this philosophy. It was not the fastest or most flexible formation, it was not dazzling to look at, but it reflected the essence of Rome, slow, heavy, but relentless. The tortoise might be slow, but every one of its steps was inevitable. Picture the sight, dozens of rows of shields locked into a square. Above, a roof of wood and leather thundered with the strikes of arrows, yet remained impenetrable. Inside were men, exhausted, weary, but prepared to stand until the last fell. For the enemy, it was not merely a wall, but the feeling of facing not men, but fate itself. Archaeology gives us rare but convincing confirmations. In Carthage and on the British Isles, wall carvings have been found depicting Roman soldiers beneath shields locked above their heads. In legionary graves, traces of wounds reveal that the blows came from above and from the front, yet often failed to reach their mark. These traces are stone shadows of that tortoise which has outlived the centuries. Modern historians such as Adrian Goldsworthy note that the testudo cannot be understood merely as a tactical maneuver. It was an element of culture. It instilled in soldiers the most essential quality, trust in the man beside them. In the tortoise, there was no room for individuality. You could be the strongest or the weakest, but survival depended only on unity. The resolution of each battle was a lesson Rome carried away with it. After victories, the Romans built new roads, forts, and defenses. After defeats, they returned, analyzed their mistakes, and created new reforms. Even the disaster of the Teutoburg forest, where 3 legions were destroyed, did not break the empire. Years later, its armies once again returned to those lands to exact vengeance. The tortoise, as a symbol of endurance, lived on in their memory. But the most astonishing thing is how the legacy of Roman tactics is still felt today. Modern armies use formations to shield themselves from fire. Police units advance under their shields like small echoes of the ancient testudo. Even sports teams line up in defense in a way that makes the spectator involuntarily recall the Roman tortoise. The symbol of unity turned out to be stronger than time. Historians still debate how often was the testudo used in real battles. Some believe it was employed mainly during sieges when soldiers had to approach walls under a hail of arrows. Others are convinced it was also used in open fields when the enemy unleashed long-range weapons upon the Romans. Yet, regardless of how frequently it was applied, the very fact of its existence entered cultural memory. Even Rome's enemies, according to Plutarch, saw in it a symbol of invincibility. And here arises the greater question, one that concerns all of us. Thousands of years have passed, the world has changed, but what of this tortoise remains in us? Could we, people of the 21st century, endure even an hour within their formation? Could we carry dozens of kilograms on our backs, march in heat and in cold, hold up a shield while an iron rain poured down from above? For the strength of the tortoise lay not in wood or in metal. It lay in men who understood that survival was only possible together. One man grew tired, but his neighbor covered him. One man fell, but the formation pressed on. And it was this very idea that the fate of the empire rested on the shoulders of ordinary soldiers that made Rome what it was. Today, archaeologists continue to find traces of those battles, historians write new books, and we gaze at the stone ruins of amphitheaters and fortresses. Yet behind all these stones stands an image, shields locked together, the sound of the trumpet, the breathing of hundreds of men merging into one. And now, knowing this history, each of us may ask ourselves, what are we prepared to endure in order to preserve our own formation? Are we capable, like the Roman legionaries, of becoming part of a wall that protects not only ourselves, but those who stand beside us? Because Rome's tortoise was not merely a trick of war. It was a lesson for humanity. One day, when your world begins to collapse, the only thing that may save you is the fact that you stand shoulder to shoulder with others. And it is for this reason that, 2000 years later, this formation continues to inspire, forcing us to reflect on what an ordinary human is capable of when his will becomes a shield.